Hello YouTube, Dave here again. This past weekend I actually had a chance to run a one-off scenario for the Dragonbane role-playing game with a couple of players in advance of trying to run the actual campaign that comes in the Dragonbane core rule set. So I had a couple of friends come over on Sunday afternoon and they made their characters. And since we had extra time and character creation for Dragonbane does not take particularly long, in fact, one player made probably the most complicated character that you could, and it still didn't take all that long for the two players to be able to make their characters with just the one rulebook to split between them. But I knew I was having some extra time, so I developed a scenario that I thought would just be kind of fun. I wasn't necessarily expecting the players to survive the scenario. It was more or less just to test out a few different things in combat, a few different scenarios, allow them to use some of their skills, and kind of see where everything went. Although I did tell them that if they actually successfully completed the scenario, they would be able to keep the treasure that they found, they'd be able to keep the reward money that they were given for the adventure that they went on, and they would be able to make advancement rolls provided their characters actually survived the scenario. So the scenario had a local lord hire the players to take care of a young dragon that had recently begun encroaching upon his territory. The dragon started by just attacking outlying farms and stealing livestock and things of that nature. However, the situation got a little bit worse when a band of orcs, a small tribe of orcs, began revering this dragon and have begun capturing travelers on the roads, be it merchants or pilgrims or just anybody that happens to be out on the roads, bringing them back to the dragon as sort of a sacrifice. And that's where things got to be a little bit too much for this noble, especially considering the fact that his nephew was among the recently captured, and the Lord's wife has been pressuring him to get the nephew back, even though the Lord himself wasn't overly pressing that particular point too much on the player characters. He definitely wanted them back, but he kind of made it sound like, hey, just do what you can, and if he ends up, not being alive when you get there, then, well, gosh darn it, at least you tried. So the players had a map of where the orc camp was, as one of the hunters for the outlying villages was able to track the orcs. However, this is not an adventurer. He was somebody who was sort of like in his twilight years, so to speak, and more or less, good at hunting small game, but not taking on like a group of orcs and a dragon and the other surprises that I had in store for the players. So when the players arrived, they were able to scout out the camp here, and I just drew a quick map here the night before. But here, I'll just show this really quick. So what this was, there were watchtowers around the perimeter of the camp. This was in a heavily forested area that came right up against a small mountain with an entrance into the mountain where the dragon's lair was. The forest was thick enough here and tall enough, the trees with enough of a canopy, that it was shadowy enough that the orcs' aversion to sunlight wouldn't be affecting them. And the dragon inside of the cave was large enough of a chamber that the dragon was able to actually fly about if he needed to. Scouting the camp themselves, they discovered that there were 14 orc warriors at the camp, 7 male, 7 female. There were also 6 orc children, in addition to a shaman who had his hut over here. Where everybody else was using like canvas tents, the shaman had a hut made out of hides. There was also a pen for his pet warg, and the chieftain's tent was a bit larger than the other regular tents because the orc chieftain, actually had his wife there with him, who was a female ogre. There was also a large grog tent, sort of like a mess tent, where they would come together and eat and drink anything that they were able to capture from the individuals that they waylaid on the road. There was a cooking pit as well as a fight pit where the young orcs can do some training along with the training dummies and the archery targets there. The regular orcs, the orc warriors and the children sort of slept in these tents. And these two watchtowers back here, where they were further away from everything and unlikely to be the location from which attackers would come from. You had an orc child in each of these watchtowers learning how to take watch. You had regular orc warriors in these 4 towers. You had one of the children attacking the practice dummy. Another child was using the archery targets there. And 2 of the children were engaged in a ritualistic combat in the fight pit, being cheered on by some of the orc, presumably orc parents there. So that's the situation that they found themselves with. So deciding that attacking the camp directly was not the best idea, our intrepid adventurers, which consisted of our dwarf mage, a wolfkin hunter, and the NPC that I let them travel with just to help even the odds a little bit was Splats, the mallard knight that I had made with the character creation video. And like I said, character creation is pretty quick and simple in the Dragonbane role-playing game, so even the wizard, which is arguably the most complex character to create, did not take very long to do. And I use the default character creation method where you roll your attributes in the and assign them in the order that they're rolled, and then at the end you can take 2 attributes and swap them with one another to sort of make sure that you have a decent attribute for whatever your class required. But I wanted to go with the default version just to see kind of how it played out, and as the campaign progresses I might allow them to start choosing where to assign their attributes. But I think starting off, it's best to do things sort of as, as close to just the basic rules as possible. So our Wolfkin Hunter took a shot at one of the orcs in the guard tower and sort of hit the ground behind the guard tower, but it was enough to draw some of the attention. So a group of orcs advanced to where the player characters were, while the other orcs ushered the children away from where the fighting was going to take place. I also forgot to mention that there was a wooden prisoner pen as well, with some of the individuals that have been captured by the orcs but not yet sacrificed to the dragon, with the noble's nephew not being among them. So the players were able to deal with the first group of orcs relatively well, although it was pretty rough going with the players rolling unusually high for some of their abilities, where rolling high is not particularly good in this version of the game. Splats the Mallard unfortunately rolled a demon on one of his weapon attacks and caused his weapon to be damaged, meaning that he had to roll every single attack that he did with that weapon at a Bane, meaning he had to roll 2d20 and take the higher number because the higher number is bad. However, they were able to defeat the first band of orcs. They retreated back into the woods where they had set up a camp for themselves, and they tried to rest for the night, also taking a round rest and a stretch rest before they did their full shift rest. During this time, I actually rolled the leaving the adventure site on the table there to see exactly what would happen. So, the first one that I rolled was actually a 2, meaning that the orcs got reinforcements. I made it a point to let the players know that while there were 14 orcs at the camp that had been observed, they weren't all currently presently accounted for. With 4 of the 14 orcs were currently off somewhere in the woods, likely hunting or scouting or doing something, patrolling or whatever it might be. But they were gone. When they returned to the camp, those orcs had also returned. It was during this second fight that the players encountered not only a couple of the regular orcs, but also the orc shaman and his pet warg, because I wanted to let the players know the difference between enemy attacks like orcs or goblins or even the ogre. The ogress was actually with this particular group, so it was the ogress, the shaman, the warg, and I think it was like a couple of orc warriors were part of this second combat. And I wanted to let the players know that there's a difference between monster attacks and some of the enemy attacks. So the monsters, they roll on their own separate table. They don't actually roll to hit with attacks. They just simply, I don't know if the warg is in the book here, but I'll just show you an example of like a monster attack. This isn't one of the ones that was there, but the monsters just simply roll on this table to determine what it is that they do. They don't roll to hit, they just simply do the attack, and the players have the option to dodge, which one of the players did actually attempt a dodge roll, which meant that they had to sacrifice their action that round because they hadn't yet gone. but they were able to successfully evade the attack that was issued towards them there. But again, it was more of just sort of a teaching moment sort of thing. This fight was pretty brutal. The warg was pretty rough to deal with, but also had 0 armor rating, meaning that it was one of the least defensive creatures in that entire combat. However, the orc shaman was looking out after his pet, was able to use his heal spell on the warg, and I was also able to use his heal spell once on the ogress before the players eventually finally did manage to defeat that entire group. But they were pretty banged up, and I believe it was the gnoll was actually unconscious at the end of that fight. It was successfully stabilized, but was unconscious and needed to be dragged away from the orc camp once again. So returning to their camp, I did roll again on the consequences table, and I actually rolled a 1, meaning that enemies at the site follow the player characters and attack at an opportune moment. So with this one here, with the ogress defeated, I actually had some things written up for what would happen. If the ogress was defeated, the regular orcs' morale would take a very serious hit, and it would make them more likely to flee future battles with the player characters. But this party that followed them included the chieftain. And if the chieftain was defeated, the remaining orcs were simply going to abandon everything. And when the chieftain went with a trio of orc warriors to find the player characters, the rest of the orcs had taken the orc children, and they had actually abandoned the camp while that was going on. Because that is like one of the things that, well, it's normally what can happen is that another adventuring party, just wipes everything out at the camp. But in this case, I just had the other orcs leave because they had already proven that the enemy that was attacking them was powerful enough to take out the shaman, the warg, and the ogress all at the same time. So their resolve had been pretty well broken at this point in time. The chieftain did attempt a single combat against the individual who had slain his wife. In this case, it would have been the NPC Splats, which the players agreed to. However, they were being very deceitful about it while preparing to actually attack the other orcs at the camp there. So I had them roll for bluff checks. I believe it's called bluff or deception. And it did not go particularly well, so just a full-on fight broke out. But in the end, the orc chieftain was slain. The other orc, there was only one orc warrior who hadn't been killed at this point in time. He just ended up taking off, fleeing into the woods. The players rested up for the night, and they made their way to face the dragon. Now, the dragon fight was actually really, really cool. During the course of this battle, because the dragon actually has what's called Ferocity 2, which means that they get to draw two cards for their initiative every round. And one of the things that the players actually did do some of in this combat, or in this adventure, which I was really happy with because it introduced mechanics to them. Just something that I was hoping might come up because I did mention it at the beginning of the night. But there were instances where one of the players would go first, but wanted to let the other player character go in his stead, right? So just it didn't make as much sense for him to go first with the other player in a potentially bad situation where he might not survive long enough to actually get his turn. So they actually swapped their initiative cards, and that's something that you can actually do in this, which is actually kind of a cool mechanic. It's similar to essentially delaying your action or, resetting your initiative in other role-playing games, but here you just take your card and you give it to whoever you are trying to switch with, and there's no way, like, you can't deny it, right? You have to trade your initiative card with somebody who has yet to go. So, for example, if the first player character went on card 3, but the person that he wanted to let go before him had card 8, then they would swap cards with each other, meaning that it was that individual's turn. He swapped the card, letting the other player character get to go, getting his attack off, or being able to do whatever it is that he wanted to do before potentially having to deal with like the dragon in this particular instance. So the fight with the dragon was really was actually kind of epic for what it was. The dragon ended up incapacitating both of the player characters, and it simply came down to splats against the dragon in the very end there. And, you know, Splats was able to hold his own. The unconscious dwarf and unconscious wolfkin, they actually stabilized. The dwarf stabilized, I believe, on his own. And Splats successfully rolled his heal skill check, even though it was only at a rating of 5 on a d20, so he had to roll a 5 or less on a d20 and ended up rolling a 3, so he was actually able to stabilize the other player character. The dragon wasn't slain, but it was driven off because it was reduced to less than 15 hit points from 60, even with its armor rating. Just the way that the fight ended up breaking down is the dragon just could not get through Splat's armor rating because I was rolling pretty garbage for his damage rolls. But having a armor rating, I think it was like 10, 8 or 10 on Splats was like just really hard to overcome. Some attacks do bypass that. Of course, critical hits will also bypass that, which there were some critical hits that were also rolled in this fight against the dragon, I believe, too. So yeah, it was just a really, really cool session, and the players had actually commented how they liked the initiative card switching mechanic. They liked the skill rolls, rolling for like their abilities and stuff like that. The spells were a lot of fun for the wizard to work with there, even though they didn't go off as much as he would have liked because he only had to roll a 10 or less on the d20. Just the way that the attributes worked out for his spell casting and everything. He had okay stats, but not necessarily the greatest, but it still was enough for him to be able to do some things. And at the end of the adventure, they were able to actually make advancement rolls because they had survived. So I went through the questionnaire with them. They were simple things like, did you participate in the adventure or the session? Because it is session-based, not adventure-based. So did you participate in the session? Did you explore a new area? Did you overcome a powerful enemy? You know, things like that. So they were actually able to advance their characters just a little bit. But it was still just a lot of fun. It was just a really cool, you know, short little adventure. Again, I wasn't actually expecting them to survive necessarily, but that was fine because it didn't count. Like if their characters had died, this was more or less just going to be like a test sort of thing to get them familiar with the system, to get them comfortable with the rules. But they were actually able to succeed. They rescued the nephew, who was actually like dancing around and doing things to entertain the dragon to prolong his life, because as long as the dragon was amused with his silly antics, it kept him alive. And they got their gold, they got their advancement rolls, and it was just a lot of fun to run this particular adventure. I really enjoy the Dragonbane role playing game, and I'm really looking forward to actually starting the full campaign, which will probably just be like a once a month type of thing that's done in between some of the Pathfinder 2nd edition games that I'm running. But I really enjoyed it, and it seemed like the players also had a lot of fun with this. There were some critical fumbles that had happened. One of the players, and a couple of times they dropped their weapon, or the ogress had her club that she ended up throwing like several feet away. No, sorry, it wasn't that. It was the orc chieftain, because he had 2 scimitars that he could actually dual wield if he spent the action points. And I actually critically failed on both rolls. I rolled 2 demons at the same time. So he damaged one sword and then threw away the perfectly good one, so that he had to attack with a Bane for the rest of the encounter. And anyway, it was a lot of fun. This is a really cool, simple RPG to sort of pick off the shelf and run on occasion. Like, I don't necessarily think that you're going to be running campaigns with this that last years and years at a time, but you do have a really fun system it was just really cool to run. Like the card initiative mechanic, I think, worked really well. The players enjoyed being able to swap their cards if they needed to in order to let somebody else go before them. We got the death and dying rules. Nobody died, thankfully, but we did have like the death saves and everything that needed to be done there. And yeah, it was just a great time overall, a really fun system. It's a very simplistic rule set, which is perfectly fine. Like, it doesn't need to be overly in-depth. There were a couple of things that we did have to sort of like inquire about. Like, one of them was like a Mastercraft weapon, which I still have yet to actually look up, so I'm just remembering that now that I'm recording this video. But there were a couple of other rules things that came up, and it was just a lot of fun to sort of get some of that out of the way in the beginning. But my experiences running Dragonbane for the first time, an actual scenario with players, was really positive, and I'm really looking forward to doing the actual campaign. So I might, if I remember to actually do them, because I kind of forgot to start to record videos of the Pathfinder campaign that I'm currently running. But at least for the first session or so, I will be doing some recaps and letting people know kind of how that went. But this experience, like I said, was a ton of fun to run. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to spending more time with the Dragonbane rule set here, and have it just be sort of an infrequent type of game, but one that I think will be a lot of fun to go through the campaign for, and see where we go from there. Anyway, let me know in the comments below if any of you actually had a chance to run the Dragonbane RPG yet. If not, are you considering picking it up? And just let me know what your thoughts are overall. And yeah, it's just kind of, like I said, a quick scenario that I threw together the night before, just a quick map that I drew up. The adventure was literally just some point form notes that I wrote in one of my scribblers, but it was, like I said, it was a really enjoyable experience. And I did a video at the beginning of the year talking about like what some of my favorite products were for the previous year, and how the Dragonbane rule set was ranked pretty high there, but I was considering that maybe recency bias was part of that. And it might still be, but I had a really enjoyable time running this. And I like the fact that all the combat and everything in the game is skill-based. It's kind of old school, like ability checks where you're just rolling to get a number or below, because most of my RPGs are looking to roll high. It's nice to kind of mix things up a little bit, especially where I roll really crap. So being able to roll low numbers can be great, for me for that. Although I will say, this is probably the first time in a very long time that I've rolled like multiple attacks, 2d20 in the same round, and rolled a natural 20 on both, which is normally good, but in this case was really, really bad. But still, a really great time overall, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from the system, and just being able to actually have a longer campaign that's done over the course of, again, probably once a month, or maybe even every other month. We'll see how frequently I run this, just because I do have the Pathfinder game going as well. But I do have, not this weekend coming up, but the next weekend is when I've got my Dragonbane game ready to go, and I can't wait for it. Anyway, once again, thank you all so very much for watching. Thank you to Free League for putting out an amazing system here, which is a ton of fun to run through. I can't wait to continue this journey. Anyway, thank you all so very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Until then, take care.